Hello. Hello, everyone, on this wonderful Sunday evening for me. It may well be afternoon or morning, depending on where you are in the world. How is everyone today? Are we all excited to talk about some wonderful Final Fantasy questions that have been pre-asked by our Patreon and YouTube members? I'm very excited, I can tell you that now. I can't wait to get into this. Should be a good one. So yes, all our questions have been pre-submitted on Patreon and YouTube memberships. If you have any questions you would like me to answer, feel free to shove them in the chat and I will get to them if I can. If you definitely want me to answer your question, then a super chat means that they will get put on the end and I will answer them absolutely. Or obviously super chats and anything like that are very much appreciated for helping to support the channel. So yes, with that, I think we can skip most of the rest of the preamble and go straight into the wonderful questions we have today. And we've got a good one to start, actually. So this question is from Premier X, who wants to know, who is the coolest character in Final Fantasy history? Their pick will be Vincent. I'm actually really curious to see what everyone says here, so feel free to put your pick for coolest Final Fantasy character in the chat, and we will see which character wins by popular vote. I've actually got quite a few options here, so we'll see if many of mine resonate with any of you. So I have Sid from Final Fantasy Tactics and 16 as kind of neck and neck in some regards. I think they're both particularly cool in their individual ways. I think Squall from Final Fantasy 8 thinks he's really cool, but also kind of is. Auron definitely has a coolness about him. He is so suave, calm. Beatrix from Final Fantasy 9 is a really good shout. And I think Fran and Balthier both have a definite cool factor about them in 12. And so, yes, let's hear your thoughts. Have I said any characters that you vehemently disagree with there? Are there any others that you feel as though I've missed out? I can see Aranea being put in there as an option in the chat by Agony. Good shout, Agony. But I think, yeah, those ones for me are the ones that kind of stood out as the cool characters. Obviously, Balthier would definitely say he's the coolest character in the entire franchise, and he's the leading man after all. But I think Fran definitely has some appeal to her. But yeah, Auron is just that, he's just so calm with everything that I think he definitely stands out as one of the coolest characters. But there are many cool characters that have graced the franchise over the years. So thank you for the question. Moving on. Another question where there's a lot of community interaction possible for this one. So this is from Kitterman Speed Shop, and they wanted to know, what is my favorite moment from Final Fantasy Tactics? This obviously is a pretty pertinent question, given that Final Fantasy Tactics, the Evil's Chronicles, is going to be releasing imminently. But also because we have just run through an incredibly detailed look at the storyline of Tactics via our Tactics Timeline series. And I think there is one, it's not a specific moment as such, but I think for me, the entire set piece that happens around Riovanna's castle is probably my favorite moment in the game. Because, and this is from like a narrative lore scenario perspective, but also from a gameplay perspective too, because it's where the story starts to get, I'm going to go spoiler free here, by the way, just in case anyone's worried. But Riovanna's castle is where the story starts to become a bit more real. It's where we as the player start to learn, I'd say, a bit more about what's actually happening behind the scenes, and some of the factions at play decide that they want to be a bit more proactive with what's happening. So they decide to take some more bold actions. It's where, I mean, we've talked about it many times across the channel, and I think it's quite infamous amongst the franchise. It's where there is a big grudge match between Ramza and another antagonist that builds up for quite a long time, and it has become one of the most infamous fights across the entire franchise. But outside of that, you also have lots of characters learning the truth about what's happening. So they're having their eyes opened just as you're having your eyes opened. There are some characters that let's just say that their fates change. And you also learn the truth about the main antagonist and how they relate to the game. So for me, yeah, my favorite moment in Tactics is everything that happens at Riovana's castle. It's one of the most important moments in the game from all those different perspectives. It's a dangerous one because I want to ask people what their opinions are on this too, but I also don't want to go too crazy into spoiler territory. So I'm just going to probably leave it there, and we'll move on to the next question, which is the name of the stream. This was, hopefully it will fit on the screen. The question was from the Cloud 1113, and they asked, if Square were to make another Final Fantasy movie, do you think they should go the route of the Spirits Within and make it original, as in not connected to any of the games, or take a game and turn it into a movie, or tell another story in that universe like how they did with Advent Children in Final Fantasy VII, or I'm guessing in relation to Kingsglaive with Final Fantasy 15? It's an interesting one, actually, because I think obviously when the Spirits Within was happening, Square Enix showed they had pedigree for making this kind of property, or it was Square at the time, and they obviously worked with on the Animatrix 2 with the Flight of the Osiris, and so they had like a real pedigree for working with this kind of content. But with the way things went, the merger with Enix, Yuichi Wada decided that working on that kind of content was not the way the company should be going. They had the option at that point of working on something quite concrete around Final Fantasy X. They decided to shelve that and then ultimately make Advent Children. And I think Advent Children was largely successful for the company. I think it did pretty well in terms of revenue through obviously box office, but then it did so well on physical copies of the DVD, the UMD, and then since then they've had Advent Children Complete for Blu-ray and Ultra HD and HD DVD and all these other things. It did really, really well for them. And it's why it's quite strange that they've chosen not to go down that route with anything else. I mean, the best we've really had is the audio drama for Final Fantasy X, and then Kingsglaive, which was essentially a promotional movie as a kind of prequel stroke pseudo concurrent property in relation to the main game. So it's an interesting one. I think the reason why we haven't really seen more is that they don't really know what to do. And the curious thing around it is that on the other side, Dragon Quest, they obviously decided to create Dragon Quest Your Story. I don't know how many of you in the chat have actually seen that movie. I think the approach they took was really interesting because it was designed to be appealing to people who liked Dragon Quest V, which is what the movie is based on. But because of how they set the movie up, it was also designed to be appealing to those who had potentially never played Dragon Quest V or even a Dragon Quest game before. And I think it largely achieved both of those objectives. It it did okay in the Japanese box office, despite launching day one on Netflix. I think it was from what I saw just briefly beforehand, it was the 25th or in the top 25 highest grossing movies released in Japan that year. And obviously, yeah, I'd imagine it was streamed quite a lot on Netflix as a result of it going on there pretty soon. So I think that if they were going to do one, I think the approach they took with the Spirits Within was very bold, but I think it was probably the wrong approach because a lot of fans went into that expecting it to be very similar to what they knew of Final Fantasy. So either the experience they'd had from 1 through 6 or the experience they'd had from 7 through 9, and they went into it and it was not really anything like any of the games. It was a completely new interpretation of Final Fantasy, and yes, some of the narrative concepts were still the same, but pretty much everything else had no real relation to Final Fantasy, and it was quite confusing for a lot of people, I think. Advent Children then goes completely the other way to be the ultimate fan service property. And I think if they could find a way to have some kind of happy medium where maybe they come up with a new Final Fantasy, but it's completely in keeping with what people would expect to see from a Final Fantasy property, or they do create a connected property and have it either as a kind of like a shortened version. I mean, like they obviously managed it with the Final Fantasy X Kabuki show. They managed to condense Final Fantasy X into a show that still made sense, and from what I understand, that was pretty well received. So there's the potential there. But I think there is a lot of potential for Final Fantasy to move more into that space. I mean, you only have to look at Capcom and Sega, and they have really been using their properties in other entertainment mediums successfully. And Square are a little bit behind in that regard, it feels like. Okay, the next question we have is from Oh Hey Kev. They asked, do you think there will be another compilation of Final Fantasy VII related project, or is part 3 of the remake trilogy going to be the conclusion? They're not counting any side games or ports, and if it's the latter, that part 3 is the conclusion, would I want them to do any more afterwards? So I think this is there's a long answer and a short answer to this one. I think that they've probably had plans for, like, broad plans for what they wanted to do with the remake project. I don't necessarily know if those plans make sense anymore. My gut is that Remake and Rebirth haven't done as well as they would have hoped, and things like The First Soldier, which was, obviously a pretty significant financial disaster, and Ever Crisis also haven't really done as well as they'd hoped either. So I think Kitase probably had lots of initiatives planned. He had spoken right around when Remake was initially launched and said that they were taking a lot of inspiration from Final Fantasy 15 in terms of how they used supporting properties to keep the community engaged as the game built out. And you could see that with what they tried to do between Remake and Rebirth with The First Soldier and with Ever Crisis. And I'm sure they had plans to do something similar between Rebirth and Part 3, but it just doesn't really make sense for them to do that anymore. Obviously, you have Crisis Core Reunion as well, which was between Remake and Rebirth. And again, it's unclear how well that did. We know that it sold roughly around 250,000 on PC and about 250,000 in Japan with physical sales. It could have sold close to 1 million copies, but if it had sold over 1 million, you'd have expected them to do some kind of announcement to celebrate the milestone, and they haven't done that. So it doesn't look like we're going to see anything between Rebirth and Part 3, whereas between Remake and Rebirth, we had, First Soldier, we had Ever Crisis, we had the episode Intermission and Intergrade, and we also had Crisis Core Reunion. So there's a lot of things that they tried to do to keep people engaged, but they haven't really done anything this time around, and it doesn't seem like they are really planning to do anything. And even Ever Crisis, which obviously when they first announced it, they billed it as a retelling of the entire compilation. We were going to get to see Before Crisis integrated into it. We were going to see Dirge of Cerberus integrated into it as well, and Advent Children. I don't know if we're ever going to get to that point in Ever Crisis's life cycle for those ambitions to manifest, but we will see. Based on that, I think that part 3 will probably be where they draw a line. Nomura has fielded questions about a Dirge of Cerberus remaster. I think that would be a dicey one for them because Dirge of Cerberus didn't sell that well when it first came out. So, and Crisis Core Reunion has probably sold worse than the original Crisis Core, so you'd expect Dirge of Cerberus to sell worse if it was remastered as well. Is it going to be worth the investment for them? Because they would have to severely rework that game to make it palatable for modern audiences, because it wasn't even that palatable when it first came out. Whereas Crisis Core obviously was, really well received on the PlayStation Portable. I think Dirge of Cerberus would have to have a lot of work done to it. Obviously, people are saying that it could potentially be something that they work on as a movie. I think it would probably, if it worked like an animated movie like they did with Last Order, that would work really, really well. And I think people would really vibe with that. But I don't know where it would fit in from a marketing perspective, because they wouldn't want to release that before part 3, because obviously Dirge of Cerberus happens technically after. We don't know where it's going to be in the continuity of the remake trilogy, but obviously in the original Final Fantasy VII's timeline, it was after a lot of things had happened. So, I think that part 3 could be it for some time. Obviously, Square Enix may surprise us, but I wouldn't be surprised if they want to move on from 7 Remake and focus on other things. Okay. Next question from Bring It On Batman. Given the addition of Gilgamesh in Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, what Final Fantasy staple would you like to see in Part 3? I think this is a difficult one because there's already been quite a lot of things integrated into Rebirth that could be considered staples of the franchise. I would say that the thing I'm probably most excited and interested to see how they handle is Knights of the Round, because they obviously took the decision to have summons be active participants in the battlefield, and they also had summons as boss fights. I don't know how they can do that with Knights of the Round because it's not a single entity. So, like, if you're going to have a boss fight against Knights of the Round, is it going to be like a fight where you have lots of different stages and in each one you're fighting against different members of the Knights of the Round? Or are they going to have it so that the King Arthur character is the one that you fight against as a representative, and that's what joins you, and then maybe that King Arthur character is the one that features in the combat setting, and then when it actually does its ultimate move, then all the other ones come in as part of that. I think that's probably what I'm most interested to see, what they're going to do with Knights of the Round. But I'm curious to see what you all think about what other things they might pull out of the closet for Part 3. Okay, next we have a question from Frederick Forrest, who asks, is there any news related to the new militant shareholder? It might be a bit early for that. So, there is nothing thus far that we can really report on. So for anyone who's not aware of what this question is in relation to, a Singaporean investment company called 3D Investment Partners has been buying lots of shares in Square Enix. They decided to increase their shareholding quite significantly in July, and they now own 14.36% of Square Enix's shares, and are obviously, because of that, a very significant shareholder. In the past, they have taken over and targeted lots of other Japanese companies, and they have been quite public with their demands and what they want from their investment. Thus far, they have not said anything in relation to Square Enix. I'm wondering if that is because Square Enix is a much higher profile company than the previous companies that they have invested in, and therefore there would be a lot more public scrutiny over whatever they try to do in comparison to the previous companies they have tried to influence. But I think it's one of those things where it's definitely a watch this space. I think it's too early, but within the next 12 months, I'd expect them to have done something. It does seem as though they're probably going to fight for a position on the board. And, if they do get that, then that could have some interesting consequences for the company, because they will be in a position to start demanding or enacting different changes. And, for reference, in previous companies, they have been very aggressive in terms of company policies. They have made suggestions for board members in terms of people joining the board and also people leaving the board. They have highlighted corruption in companies that they have invested in. They haven't really been shy about doing a lot of things, and they are not above publicly talking about things as a way of trying to get what they want. So it's going to be an interesting one to see how that plays out over the next sort of 2 years, I'd say. Next question is from Anthony Ragucci. What are your thoughts on titles being ported to console? I've been wondering whether titles like Final Fantasy 3 and 4DS and the after years will ever get a wider release other than just Steam. Those were my original ways to experience the classic Final Fantasy games, and I'd love to play them again. I think that it's unlikely to happen, unfortunately. I think from Square Enix's perspective, Final Fantasy 3 and 4 in their kind of DS remake form, and also the after years in its DS remake form, I think they were considered more legacy games by Square Enix now. I mean, they were first released on Steam over a decade ago, and there isn't really much demand for them. The Pixel remasters have very much usurped them in terms of popularity. And I mean, if you look at them right now, Square Enix are selling the 3D remakes of 3 and 4 at a cheaper price than they're selling the Pixel remasters. And I think that tells you how much they value those games. I'd imagine that the only reason they're still live is because it doesn't really cost them anything. If people want to still keep buying them on that platform, then they can do. But if Square were going to start thinking about porting those older games to new systems, that's going to cost them money, because they have to work through all the licensing agreements. They have to make sure they're going to work. You don't know what kind of state the code is in terms of being able to port to like the Switch or Switch 2 or Xbox or PlayStation 4 and 5. And I don't think I don't think they would consider it to be a worthwhile investment, especially as the Pixel remasters do exist, and apparently they're selling incredibly well. So I think that, yeah, unfortunately, those older games are probably going to stay available in the platform that they are available in right now. Unless we get some kind of crazy thing happen like we've got with Tactics: The Ivalice Chronicles. But I just don't see them doing anything with those 3D remakes of 3 and 4 beyond what they already have done with them, unfortunately. Okay. Next question is from Tony Rex. Tony asks 2 questions, and I've chosen to choose one of the questions. The question I've chosen is, what do you think are the chances of a female lead protagonist being there in Final Fantasy 17? I think probably as things stand and as more time passes, I think the probability is higher. We're seeing more and more games opt to have female protagonists in the lead role from the AAA studios. But I honestly think that who's in charge of the project will probably have the biggest influence. Well, it will have the biggest influence. The challenge we have around that is that we have no idea who's going to be in charge, and we're in a really weird situation with Final Fantasy where for a long time in the earlier days of the franchise, there was a high degree of consistency. And we roughly knew what each of the lead creatives wanted from their games. But the last time we had back-to-back Final Fantasy games being directed by the same person was the Final Fantasy 13 trilogy, which is now over a decade old. Final Fantasy 13 is coming up to 15 years old. And if we ignore 13.2 and Lightning Returns as the last time we had two back-to-back games directed by the same person, and if we include Remake and the MMOs, then you have to go all the way back to Final Fantasy 7 and 8 as the last time we've had two what we would consider mainline games directed by the same person, which is pretty crazy because you're going on almost 30 years since we've had a game in the Final Fantasy franchise directed by the same person back to back. In that time, since Final Fantasy VIII, there have been 10 different directors that have overseen a mainline game, and technically 11 if we are including Minagawa for 12 after he replaced Matsune when he left. So it's really hard to figure out what approaches might be. I mean, the only person we really know about is Toriyama. Toriyama has directed the most games in that time because he did 13.2, 13, Lightning Returns, and 10.2. So he's done 4 games, whereas everyone else has only done 1. Ito technically 2, because he co-directed 12. But Toriyama has been pretty adamant about having a female lead. There's been a female lead in every single one of the games he's directed. Obviously 10.2 we had Yuna, 13, even though every character is really a main character in 13, but Lightning was the poster child. 13.2 has obviously got Sarah, and Lightning Returns is very much Lightning. Every other director has opted to have a prominent male lead. So we don't really know. I mean, obviously, from a probability perspective, unless Toriyama is directing Final Fantasy 17, it's odds on to be a male lead. But it's hard to tell. And it doesn't really matter. Someone's pointed out there's Stellar Blade, Horizon, Nier, all games that have sold incredibly well with a female lead. Yuna, as mentioned by Super Widget Master, was a phenomenal character. And obviously in 10, she was, depending on your perspective, either the main character or the co-main character or the deuteragonist. Final Fantasy's had plenty of really strong female characters over the years. We probably could have had it with Agni at some point if that game had ever been made. But yeah, I think there's a decent chance, but I think it really depends on who's put in charge. And yeah, we don't know. There's no indication whatsoever as to what direction Square are going to go in, because they don't really have a Final Fantasy team as such. They have numerous teams that could possibly be working on a new Final Fantasy game, and we have no idea who would direct it, because even if it's put in a team that has previously worked on a big Final Fantasy game, they could choose to change the director and have someone else completely different come in. So hopefully that answers the question. But I think there's a pretty decent chance that there would be a female lead. Thank you very much for the super chat there, Mad Cabal. They said that the female protagonist will be none other than Dr. Aki Ross, as we take to the stars with American Space Marines in Final Fantasy 17, The Spirits Within 2. I mean, so the funny thing about that is that actually was not too far from Sakaguchi's vision. Like, there's a quote from around when the Spirits Within was being created that Sakaguchi wanted Aki Ross to be a malleable star who could move between platforms. So if the Spirits Within was successful, and I mean, it may have happened either way, if he hadn't been ceremoniously or unceremoniously ushered out of the company. But Sakaguchi wanted Aki Ross to be akin to a real life actor, that they could move into a game of some kind. So Aki Ross could have been the lead in, say, Final Fantasy 13 had things panned out with the Spirits Within. And we would have had this kind of weird situation where they created the first digital actor, which obviously you can see the initial blueprints of that because they were putting Aki Ross in, like, you know, FHM and Maxim magazine's top 100 like hottest women, and I wonder if anyone's ever going to do that or try to do that again. It would be quite interesting. But either way, yes, I think if Toriyama is put as director of Final Fantasy 17, you're pretty much guaranteed to see a female lead. With the other potential directorial candidates, I have no clue. Okay, that then dovetails nicely with our last question for the stream, unless anyone else has any more, which is from Gregoroth Beolv, who says or asks, what team or individual do you think are most likely to be working on Final Fantasy 17? I can see that in the chat there's already been some discussions around this, and I honestly, it's difficult to tell at the moment. Square Enix are going through so much change, and they're not really being transparent around that change, which, fair enough, they don't have to be. At the moment, obviously, we know that they had a previous business division structure. The business divisions, I mean, at one point there was well over 10 of them. They cut those down to be more streamlined, but then they had big business division heads, but then they had subdivisions within those business divisions. Now they've transitioned to the more the title of creative studio, which they feel is more friendly and less business-like. And you know, they haven't really been transparent around what's going on with those creative studios. The assumption based on credits is that Creative Studio 1 is being helmed by Hamaguchi, but obviously Hamaguchi right now is working on part 3 of the remake trilogy. So if he is working on 17, he will not be working on that in any kind of major capacity until the third part of remake is complete. Creative Studio 2 is apparently being helmed by Yoshinori Kitase with Motomo Toriyama and Shinpei Yashima as deputy studio heads. So, and we have no real idea what they're working on. Their credits so far have been relating to the Saga franchise, of all things. You then have Creative Studio 3, which is being helmed by Yoshida. They are obviously still knee-deep in Final Fantasy 14, and Yoshida has done his, the interview he always does that says, I'm not leaving 14 anytime soon. We're going to be working on it for the rest of my life. But he has also started to leave a little breadcrumb to say that he is open to working on a new IP if the company asks him to. He has also said that he would like to at some point create another MMO. So, and obviously, like, before he got put onto 14, he was working on a new IP, but it got cancelled because he got told to look after 14 instead. It would be, in my opinion, quite silly if they didn't take advantage of all the work they did with 16, because yeah, sure, there are some aspects of 16 that people don't like, but there is so much about that game that was positive. And if they aren't given the chance to iterate on that and create something new based on everything they came up with and everything they accomplished, that would be a really big missed opportunity, in my opinion. Creative Studio 4 look like they may be helmed by Nozue, who was the director of Kingsglaive and typically looks after all of their visual arts and animation. That seems to be, like, from a crediting perspective, the case, but again, we've got no official confirmation of that. But I don't see them looking after Final Fantasy 17. Creative Studio 5 is obviously helmed by Asano. They are definitely not working on Final Fantasy 17 because they're going to be working on HD 2D games the rest of their lives. We know nothing about Creative Studio 6 other than the fact that it must exist because there is a Creative Studio 7. And Creative Studio 7 is also a bit of a black box. The only credits they have so far are that they were involved with the Romancing Saga 2 remake, and that Hisanao Suzuki is a technical director of Creative Studio 7. So, like, honestly, who's working on Creative Studio? Who's working on Final Fantasy 17? No idea. Panda Eyes, that was the assumption too. They had said there were only going to be 4 studios, but now there are numbers as high as 7 as of this year. I would love it if they, like, created a proper org chart so that we could see all the studios, who's in charge of them, and what they're working on. It would be really nice, but based on how video game development happens these days, I mean, we don't even have that kind of transparency on a lot of PlayStation's first-party studios. Everything these days is shrouded in mystery. Everyone seems adamant that they want to work on games for 5 to 7 years, and so they really get concerned about leaks and everything. So, Final Fantasy 17, I think, is so far in the future that so much stuff can happen in that time, and we don't even know. I'm sure they have an ambition to make that game. I don't see them giving up on the Final Fantasy franchise anytime soon. I don't think it's in the position it was around when, the time between 13 and 15, where they were in a really difficult place and they were not expecting Final Fantasy 15 to even sell 5 million copies. I think that the franchise is in a more positive place now than it was then, weirdly enough, even though the sales have gone down. But yeah, it's so difficult to tell what is going to happen, because there's so much ambiguity around the company as a whole right now, and that obviously then makes it very difficult to have any kind of prediction about who's going to be doing what and who's working on what. So yeah, hopefully that answers the question. I don't think I've really answered it, but I honestly, there is no most likely. There are logical options, and those logical options would be that either Hamaguchi goes onto it after Part 3 is done and they leverage everything they've learned from the remake trilogy to make an original Final Fantasy that uses the same base, or Creative Studio 3 take everything they learned from Final Fantasy 16 and then make a new original version, and take on board all the feedback they got. I have no idea what Katase's Creative Studio 2 would be working on, but they are another potential, obviously. There are a lot of senior talent apparently involved with that, with Toriyama even being listed as deputy studio head. Also, curiously enough, this is all very, very Square centric. I think Dragon Quest aren't even part of the creative studio structure, because there is a Dragon Quest team who get credited, but they aren't a creative studio. They're just a Dragon Quest team. So yeah, who knows? Honestly, I really hope that when we get to the end of this financial year, maybe that Square post a really big transparent look at the company and their plans and how they've been doing against their objectives. But I think that's wishful thinking. But yes, with that, I think we're probably at the end of this stream. So a big thank you to everyone for joining in, and hopefully you enjoyed the chat. And there should be another one in approximately a month for October. If you want to ask questions, obviously you can do so in the chat itself, or if you join up on Patreon or YouTube memberships, I basically put up a thread where you can get questions put in there, and then I'll answer them during the stream. But yes, thank you all for joining, and I'll see you all soon. Bye.